안녕하세요. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Faculty of Liberal Education and the Institute of Asian Studies at SNU. We would like to welcome everyone, all our esteemed guests today who are sitting in this room. I hope all of you who are watching through Zoom can see us. We are very excited to hold this talk, seventh in a series of talks entitled Voice of Asia, a forum which engages in bringing together diverse speakers across various spectrums of intellectual discourse with distinctive Asian perspectives. We look forward to hearing from our distinguished speaker, President Kasim of Akita International University, on a newly envisioned blueprint for higher education that will truly transform the future. Before inviting our speaker to the podium, please join me in welcoming the Vice President of Academic Affairs of Seoul National University, Professor Kim Sung-kyu, who will give congratulatory remarks for this special occasion.
네, 안녕하십니까. 서울대 교육부총장 일을 하고 있는 국어국문학과 김성규입니다. 오늘 아키타 국제교양대학의 몬테카심 총장님을 모시고 특별 강연을 듣게 된 것을 서울대 교수로서 매우 기쁘게 생각합니다. 아키타 국제교양대학은 교육 시스템 혁신과 학생들의 창조성과 도전 정신, 문제 해결 능력을 키우고 극대화하는 데 큰 성공을 거둔 것으로 알려져 있습니다. 그러한 성공의 바탕에는 큐슈의 리츠메이칸 아시아 태평양 대학에서 교육 혁신의 경험을 축적하신 몬테카심 총장님의 열정과 노력이 깔려 있는 것으로 알고 있습니다. 서울대학교도 오랜 기간 동안 기초교육원을 중심으로 융합교육을 통해 학생의 성장을 돕기 위해 학문적 역량을 키우고 교육의 변화를 추구해 왔습니다. 또한 서울대학교는 인문학, 사회과학, 기초과학 및 예술 영역에 이르기까지 학술 역량을 기를 수 있는 교육과정들을 개발해 왔으며 교양교육에 특화된 다채로운 교양 수업들과 다양한 교수진, 연구시설을 갖추기 위해 노력을 하고 있습니다. 이러한 과정 속에서 서울대학교는 2025년을 목표로 하여 기초교양교육을 융합교육과 역량개발이라는 틀로 크게 바꾸는 준비를 하고 있습니다. 이 시점에서 몬테카심 총장님의 강연은 많은 시사점을 던져주리라 기대합니다. 그리고 오늘의 특별한 행사가 두 대학을 보다 가깝게 만들고 동시에 학술 교류와 유대를 심화시킬 것이라고 생각합니다. 오늘 제7회 아시아의 목소리에서 국제교양교육과 글로벌 리더십을 주제로 강연하기 위해 서울대를 방문하신 몬테카심 총장님 감사합니다. 그리고 이번 학술 행사를 함께 주최해 주신 기초교육원의 최윤영 원장님, 동아문화연구소의 김병준 소장님, 후원을 해주신 포니정 재단 관계자분들께도 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 또한 오늘 토론을 맡아주시는 기초교육원 이동환, 권대훈 두 부원장님과 이번 학술대회를 준비해 주신 모든 선생님들께도 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 끝으로 오늘의 강연과 토론이 이 자리에 계신 분만이 아니라 서울대 구성원들에게 많은 영감을 주리라고 확신하면서 인사 말씀을 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
부총장님 감사드립니다. Thank you, Professor Kim Sung-kyu. Now it is my pleasure and a great honor to introduce to you today our esteemed speaker, President Monte Kasim. President Kasim's achievements are too numerous to enumerate, but just to mention a few, he is currently President and Chair of the Board of Trustees and Professor of Health, Environment, and Life Science at Akita International University. He received his master's and doctoral degree from the Graduate School of Engineering at University of Tokyo after receiving Bachelor of Science at University of Ceylon in Sri Lanka. Prior to his current appointment in year 2021, he was President and Trustee of Shitsenkan University. He is also Professor Emeritus and Senior Advisor of Ritz-Micon Trust, where he was Vice Chancellor and President of Ritz-Micon Asia Pacific University. He is also on the governing president's advisory boards of several leading Japanese universities. President Kasim also served as senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka from 2015 to 2019. I would be remiss not to mention that along with these great achievements, President Kasim is a renowned scholar. His current research focus is on health, environment, and life sciences, applying all of these scientific findings in real-life situations. As a renowned scholar and esteemed administrative leader of highly respected institution, President Kasim has pioneered a new path in higher education and has been recognized for his great contributions as the recipient of the Order of the Sacred Treasure with gold rays and neck ribbon in 2016 from the Japanese government. He has also received a Lifetime National Honors Award for contributions to science from the government of Sri Lanka in 2017. The title of today's talk is Applied International Liberal Arts and Global Leadership, Challenges Facing Gen Z and Beyond. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to President Monte Kasim.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today, and also for our online participants. Thank you for coming. I'm really pleased that the Faculty of Liberal Education has invited me. And the reason is because I think Asian higher education is in transition. And the liberal education ethos is a very important part of taking countries like Japan and Korea, which are at the leading edge of Asian education, to the next level and shaping the future. So today I will talk about our experiments in applied international liberal arts and how this links to global relationships, as well as to leadership of our young scholars. The challenges that face the current generation will be the focus of my talk, and let's see how we can go beyond that generation as well. This is me just after the tsunami in Sri Lanka, trying to see how we could restore resilience into our infrastructure and our systems. There are four parts to what I'm going to say. The first part is on Asian higher education and Gen Z in the context of that higher education. Now, there are three transformations I'll talk about. The first is how Asia overall, and how, since my experience is largely in Japan, I will talk about how Japan is also transforming. You might find parallels to your situation in Korea, which I don't know enough about to comment, but please enlighten me as well through this discussion we will have after the talk. Overall, I think Asian education system has to come out of a colonial mindset, because many of the Asian countries were colonized. Japan was a little different, but it tried becoming a colonizer. And that also has its weaknesses. And the loss to the American forces in Second World War created a colonial sort of mindset that has remained. Now, despite that, Asia has grown. And there is a tremendous amount of growth across the region. It's one of the most dynamic parts of the world. Side by side with this drive to modernization, we find there are still elements of Asian values. And I am glad that Dr. Park Jung-hwan took me yesterday to stay one night with no internet in a traditional village, which actually made me think deeply about what I'm going to talk to you today. I think we must cherish these values that our past and our tradition has brought us. We must not feel that they should be subservient to the forces that are around us. I think that is a very important part. The local context in which a liberal arts education is applied is just as important as the universality of liberal arts education. So, taking localities to the universal ethos of a liberal arts education is a challenge. Fortunately, Asia has invested a great deal of money in higher education, and it is bearing fruit. And that is why Asia is in the driving seat of the global economy today. Now, against this background, I dare to say, that there is that mindset that is not entirely ours that is driving us. What is that? My country, your country, coming out of colonialism, we felt that development and modernization is very important. And development and modernization meant borrowing what was successful in countries that went before us and applying it in our own context. I think now we are at the stage where we have to go beyond this mindset. In Japan, there are additional problems which I think you share in Korea too. We have aging of populations, a low birth rate, and Japan's expectations from a university education when it started modernizing about 150 years ago was largely to borrow from the West and implement in the East. Now, that past met disastrous consequences during the war, brought some fortuitous things for other countries like yours and mine, in that the colonizing powers' defeat led to us being forced to think on our own feet for our own selves. However, the present is always tied to the past in some way. And if we realize what that is, it is easier to shape the future. So I think what we have to look at is a changing development paradigm, not a development paradigm of modernization following someone else, but seeing what is it that we really want to do in the years ahead. The why of why we want to do it. That should be the most important thing, followed by the how. And I think the context of the liberal arts education is that it asks the why and places importance on the why. So let us look at all these things in the next slide. As this is looking at tomorrow, the second transformation. I think GX and DX are going to change our lives like nothing has done it before. We have an existentialist threat because all the wealth of today, and I must say the world today is much more wealthy than when I was a child. But it has come at a great price of energy and resource extraction which go way beyond what the earth can replenish. So this era where man has in a sense throttled himself or herself is what is called the age of the Anthropocene. And I'll talk about that later. Disastrous consequences which might emerge from global climate change and, both dramatic and slow onset disasters are in the offing. We have to learn how to deal with this quickly. And future leaders will also have to be making these decisions on their feet. So this is a challenge for us as we shape Generation Z. Conservation of biodiversity is something that companies, which are very powerful today, have not yet fully realized. But thanks to COVID-19, I think that is also beginning to change. So these are the things that we have to share with our young scholars. Energy and materials are revolutionizing at a speed that we couldn't imagine before. Even in my locality in the northeast of Japan, which is not a very rich region, it is a home of global investment in large-scale wind turbines. Our challenge in the region is to see how this energy can be used for the locality's future, rather than sending it all off on the national grid for the 3 metropolitan regions of Tokyo, Nagoya, and Osaka to consume. So how do we, again, this is a neo-colonial mindset where the 3 metropolitan regions in Japan have tended to colonize the rest of the country. So colonization is not necessarily something that is only foreign. It can even be within our own cultures and communities. So for me, the challenge as a public university in the northeast of Japan, which is not a rich region, is how do we make this region resilient to change and to be able to create new value for the future. The digital transformation is also going to bring us all kinds of changes. Web 3.0 will have communication speeds that you haven't had before. That is going on to Web 4.0, 5.0, Web N in the future. Things are going to get faster. But together with the fast communications, we will be delegating a lot of the work that we do today to avatars in what is called the metaverse. So the universe that we know might be supplanted by the metaverse. Now, we know we can create avatars, but we haven't, like life has, learned how to kill avatars. Life programs its cells to die after a certain point, and therefore we might die, but our avatars might be left in the metaverse. Can you imagine what this is going to mean? It will confuse everyone. A whole host of avatars without a living representation. This is the metaverse that Facebook does not talk about. But a liberal arts education forces you to think about this. We should be driving what our engineers do, how our engineers work, and start by asking why. Why is the question. AI, IoT and biomachine interactions, I will talk about later, will have similar ethical questions which are deep and profound. Humanoid robots will be a norm, and how will humans interact with machines? In 2005, I was involved with asking ourselves, where should Japan invest? And one of the recommendations of the panel I was in was that we should look at the ethics of the biomachine interface. Engineering schools are not equipped to ask the profound questions that a liberal arts education asks. So we have to learn to work across our universities, linking the whys of the liberal arts with the what and the how that follows in our more pragmatic schools of science and technology. So, for example, I always find that we value perfection. But I think we should also celebrate imperfection. Why? Because it makes us sympathize with others, empathy is born, and it deepens our understanding of weakness. It is easy to understand strength, but it is much more difficult to appreciate and forgive weakness. If you remember even the words of Christ, he said, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I think there is some wisdom there that has lasted through the ages, which will be useful for us in shaping the future. We prize intelligence, and we often look down a little bit when people are overly emotional. But emotions are central to the creative spirit. So if we want creative solutions for challenging problems, you must not dismiss emotions. These are not things that we are taught in schools of science and technology and engineering. I never learned this as a microbiologist. But when I became an architect and I had to deal with clients, I had to talk to them, persuade them, try to understand what is it they wanted, and try to do something better than what they wanted. These interactions, interpersonal interactions, teach you a lot. So I think while we mobilize Industry 4.0 and try to shape Society 5.0, the liberal arts is going to play a central role. Now look at Japan's higher education institutions. The global context has been shown by Japanese government as being increasingly important. But it is not a long-standing effort. The old globalization was largely to help Japan modernize. But the global context that we should be engaging with now in Japan is to see how we can shape the world of tomorrow. And it is in that context that I think the reforms at our university should take place. And this is the third transformation. Internationalization is a buzzword, has been a buzzword for a long time. I think Professor introduced me as saying that I had set up new ways of doing things at Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University. And one of the challenges of that was that our internationalization, even at Ritsumeikan, was not very old. When 9/11 happened, I was in Sri Lanka. I saw the towers breaking down. We had 400 scholars, teachers and students in the US at the time. I was Dean of International Affairs for the university. I phoned my colleague in the deanship and asked him, what did we do when we had the Gulf War? He started laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? This is serious business. He said, Sensei, when we had the Gulf War in 1991, we had 13 students overseas and we received 11. So Ritsumeikan's internationalization hadn't even started 20 years before 9/11. So it is relatively recent. That's what I'm trying to say. And because it is relatively recent, mistakes will be made, lessons learned, and we have to forge the future. But because of the pace of change in Asia, I think the lessons have been learned relatively quickly. And in 2000, as our Millennium Project, Ritsumeikan set up Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University in 2000. The current university I'm in, Akita International University, was set up in 2004, and it is barely 20 years old today. So you can see how recent things are. So we are all learning together, really. And that, I think, is why we must work together. And I'm really glad that you invited me here to renew my acquaintance with Korea, from where I've had many brilliant scholars guiding me in my lab. There's one of them seated back there. And there's another next to him who is also a former Ritsumeikan alumnus. But I think what is important is that we must come together in a spirit of collegiality across Asia and transcend the colonial mindset that we have. And I don't say this with denigration, I just mean that it's a mindset of dependency on someone else for ideas and inspiration. But I think we must learn to cultivate from within this. And that doesn't mean being chauvinistic. That is also a weakness. We must go beyond chauvinism, have universal values, but also appreciate what is local and unique. That is the challenge for the liberal arts in the future. Now, the national and the public, as well as the private university landscape in Japan, has an interesting statistic. 75% of Japan's undergraduates come out of private universities. So the foundation of society is actually laid by private universities. And national and some public universities are actually nurturing the elite. But today I think it's a learning for all ethos. how do we go beyond elitism? I think every individual can be an elite because they all have unique characteristics that we can draw from. How can our education system respond to this? Now, I think the secret is to look at the extreme. Look at the most difficult cases. I often work with the most difficult cases because if you can mainstream the extreme, you can mainstream anything. That's the reason. Let me give you a small example. You know, we have water taps in our sinks where you can turn the tap and open it, which becomes very difficult for people with physical disabilities in their hand to carry out. So, water in your home is a convenience, but the tap is an inconvenience. But now we have many taps which are up and down motions only, which even a disabled person can do quite easily. Now, if we take the disabled person as the extreme, because we have designed for the extreme, it is convenient even for the mainstream. And when it becomes convenient for the mainstream, the price of putting out that gadget falls tremendously. So I think it's very important, and design is an aspect that I would encourage liberal arts schools to input into their curriculum. Designing for the extreme and transforming it into the mainstream could be one of the exercises. We've just opened a design laboratory in our university to see how we can do this. It's not doing as well as I want it to, but I hope that we can keep tweaking it and making it actually transform the extreme into the mainstream. There are some, I've taken 5 what I think are interesting universities in Japan, so please Google them. It might be interesting for you too. Sokendai is the National Institute of Advanced Graduate Studies. NIST is the Nara Institute of Science and Technology. Now, Sokendai and NIST are classical national universities with a difference. Sokendai is a small university where it places its students in all of Japan's national research institutes, from the social sciences to the natural sciences. So it actually has frontline disciplinary research coupled with Sokendai trying to create a transdisciplinary platform. It's a work in progression, but it's coming out quite nicely. So please look at Sokendai. The Nara Institute of Science and Technologies was a little more conventional, but it has also done away with disciplines and departments to become a kind of transdisciplinary fundamental science institute. It used to have 3 faculties, and now it has one faculty and no departments, and it has, I think, 8 concentrations. So look at Nara Institute of Science and Technology. Look at OIS, the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. It's barely 10 years old, and now for research output in terms which is adjusted for size, Nature ranks it as number 9 in the world. That is 1 rank below Princeton. The University of Tokyo, my alma mater, is number 22, I think, in that agenda. So again, the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, which had its first Nobel laureate last year within a period of 10 years, is something that you could look at. The Asia Pacific University, I think you all are familiar. I think maybe there are many exchanges as well as our university, where you already have an exchange agreement with our places you could look at. So when you have some time, please Google these 5 institutions. You'll see something interesting happening there. Now, what are our achievements and our expectations? I think our pedagogy has changed over the last 2 decades. The founding president felt that language is the most important thing. And it's true. Japanese is a really hard language to learn, even for Japanese people. I think Korean is probably easier, but many of us in Asia, because of the diversity of languages, we tend to have difficulties in learning foreign languages unless it is forced on us. And that is exactly what the first president of AIU did. He said, you will not graduate if you do not get the required number of credits. You can't enter the university if you're not proficient in the language, and you can't graduate if you haven't got all your credits, and the credits are only given for courses taught in English. So this was challenging because many Japanese people believe that the Japanese people are bad at languages. He said, I don't care. You won't graduate if you don't do it. And he made sure that he destroyed the myth that Japanese people cannot speak English. So the second president, my immediate predecessor, he was a great believer in the importance of the liberal arts. And he really laid the foundation for a liberal arts curriculum, but benchmarked it against the best liberal arts schools in the world, most of which, if not all, are in the United States. Now, I'm the third president. And what should I do? I have often felt that while a liberal arts education is exemplary and good, it develops your mind, it disciplines your mind, it makes you reflect on yourself, it enables you to empathize with others, and these are all wonderful characteristics that I think every human being must have. So I think it's very important, but as you know, in Asia, and partly because of that colonization, modernization ethos, we only value results that are utilitarian. So if things are not useful for modernization or development or whatever, we dismiss it. This is a mindset that we have to break. That it is just as important to be fundamental in your reflection of thought as it is to be in the application of that thought. So our focus is now on applied international liberal arts, which is actually to link profound thought with responsive action. That is the core of the applied international liberal arts. So, as you can see, we are not doing too badly in the rankings. For a university that is less than 20 years old, we've gone up 2 places. I always dread these rankings. I don't believe in them really. But one good thing that the rankings do is they show us our weaknesses. And if you look at this, I have marked our weaknesses in red. I think we are number 15. There was a time when we were number 10, when we were new, but we became a kind of model for Japanese higher education, and many other richer and bigger universities overtook us. But nevertheless, we've come up 2 places from last year. And the reason we've come up, I think, is because of the beginnings of these reforms. However, we have weaknesses which we must correct. One of them is a lack of educational resources. It's difficult for a not so rich university in a poor prefecture, where we are a prefectural university, to suddenly increase our resource capacities. And I will talk about that challenge. And if you have questions, please ask me. I will answer them frankly. The second area, of course, is that we have not focused enough on our educational outcomes. We have delivered our pedagogy with the how. I think if we ask the why, our educational outcomes will be much more evident. So what I have said just now, up to now, actually holds for what the university should do for tomorrow. Right, now let us look at Generation Z. These are the definitions, not mine, but of other scholars who have seen roughly like 15-year cycles. As you know, I am one of the fossils of this chart. In the 1946 to 1964 category. I was born in 1947. But around us, all of us, around us we have Generation Z. So how do we enable their futures to be useful and productive? So one of the characteristics of Gen Z that you see on the web is that they are digital natives, and many of them are addicted to the web. They spend in the US more than 10 hours a day online. Is this a good thing? Can we change it? What should we change it to? These are all challenges of transitioning into a digitalized and increasingly digitalized society. But let us ask whether this is only true for rich countries like the US and Japan and Korea, or is it also true for other countries? Let me take you through my home country, Sri Lanka. I think in our countries, the face of Greta Thunberg is probably the face of these kinds of protests, is an angry generation. It's an angry generation that is impatient and sometimes even unforgiving of past generations for bringing about these catastrophic environmental changes. How can we transform anxiety and anger into productive action? I think it is important for these voices to question what is, but I think it is also important to treasure what was when we plan to shape what will be. There is a panel hosted by the National Geographic Society and Nature Conservancy, which is trying to give these young voices an elevated platform. Even Facebook's metaverse has now taken this on. I don't trust them very much, but nevertheless they've also taken it on. But it is a hint of our times. How do we elevate the voices of our youth to become productive? Now this might hold in Sweden, it might hold in Western Europe, it might hold in Japan, Korea, but will it hold everywhere? That is why I am taking you to Sri Lanka. The millennials and Generation Z, represented by what we call the struggle, Aragalaya, drove a government out of power in June 2022. Now you are familiar with students driving governments out of power in Korea. Maybe we learned a lot from you. But it started as a very peaceful protest, like I think it was in Korea too. And youth had the moral high ground. Citizens didn't want a government and a president that they voted in with a huge majority at the polls in 2019. They elected a parliament in 2020, giving the same people a large mandate. And then, barely a year and a half later, they wanted to chase them out. Why did this happen? We became a nation in debt. A corrupt political system led us to default in our repayments to our international creditors. Our currency collapsed, and there were lots of doubts raised about whether our democracy is a functioning democracy. Sri Lanka, interestingly, had the world's first modern woman prime minister. Nevertheless, doubts about our democracy. We had votes for women from 1931, universally. Votes for women restricted to those who can read and write from 1921, much, much older than France, and certainly much older than Sweden. So we were at the front line of democracy, I think. But now we have doubts about whether democracy works. Are we a failed state? It's the question on everyone's mind. And of course, the reasons are many. Sri Lankans have always had a sense of entitlement, and this has governed how they vote. If someone promises to give them something, they will vote for that person. That is what happened at the last elections, which led to the disaffection. Corruption and mismanagement accentuated it, but it is actually the sense of entitlement of the Sri Lankan voter that led to the debacle. Because we can't blame anyone else. We might blame our leaders, but we elected our leaders. So who is to take the blame? And this is the painful lesson that Sri Lanka has learned. Of course, it was accelerated by COVID-19, loss of inbound tourism and foreign remittances from the Middle East, of Sri Lankans working abroad, and the fuel prices increases of the Ukraine war. All of these came together and caused this collapse. The same digital natives who mobilized large crowds, despite having the moral ground early on, became hostage to violence. Houses were burnt of prominent politicians, including the current president who was selected by parliament, who was not from here. And why is that? Because once a peaceful protest gets hijacked by people who are prone to violence, and that is what happened in Sri Lanka. There were both political elements as well as civil society elements which believed in violence that transformed this. The net result was this. So mob violence rose, anger overcame reason, and treasured heritage was lost. This is the house of the current president being burnt. He is my neighbor. We are childhood friends. Our parents were friends. But what did we lose by his house being burnt? He had a tremendous archive of books which he was going to gift to the International Institute for Training Diplomats. That was burnt. He had huge archival records from even before we were colonized by the Portuguese, which his family had handed down over the years, which were burnt. There were many cultural artifacts handed down over generations, some several hundred years old and some even more than 1,000 years old. All went up in flames. Is this the path to global leadership of a disaffected, angry generation? Naturally, it lost steam. You cannot do this for long. But the price we paid was tremendous. So for me, this is why I want to work with Gen Z. I do not want them to be co-opted by elements in society which are not ethical. They have to believe in dialogue and peaceful transformation, even if that transformation has to be extremely dramatic. And in countries like Sri Lanka, Japan and Korea, we have a democratic establishment and the right to vote. If we don't treasure it, who is going to treasure it? You see what even in mature democracies like the US, the storming of the Capitol gives us a lot of cause to think about democracy. Can it only work when people are honorable? What happens when it is hijacked by dishonorable people? What do we do? These are what we have to instill in our young charges, and this is why a liberal arts education is important. We must question what is, but we must also treasure what was. And if we don't do that, we will not be able to shape what will be, and we will lose steam. The result in Sri Lanka, long queues for food, no gas or kerosene for cooking, no medicines, no treatment, loss of hope. Is this what we want for Gen Z and the Alpha generation? I think we need the strength to rise above crises. And I am really glad that the millennials have stepped up in Sri Lanka. This was what was there when the current president came into power. He worked quietly behind the scenes with millennials to create a smooth QR-based fuel distribution system where gangsters and others could not hijack the fuel distribution and create a black market. Constructive engagement in crises is important, and this is why we need transgenerational dialogue. So you can see that Gen Z, as global leaders, will have new challenges. Fortunately, there are platforms being created for informed action, and I hope that these can also enter the domain of developing and emerging economies. And we, as responsible democracies in the West, in Japan, in Korea, we must try to see how developing and emerging economies can become honorable in their conduct on the international stage and also on their national stage. So you can see these group Gen Z attendees from all walks of life, from all countries, attending the COP27 Climate Change Forum in Sharm el-Sheikh. Now, 1 year before, they were protesting outside with Greta Thunberg holding a banner. 1 year later, they were accommodated inside the mainstream of the conference. This is what I mean by taking the extreme into the mainstream. It is important to nurture hope. And as I said, even Meta is moving to create platforms by which the youth can articulate their true wishes. I am a little more prone to be happy with the National Geographic Institute's platform, but nevertheless, there are these platforms, and the more honorable people join them, the better those platforms will be. So our job is then to train the people in leading lives that will enable them to make these platforms constructive places. They have to understand global climate change. This is a chart of the average atmospheric temperature change from the end of the last ice age, the late Pleistocene, through the Holocene, where the climate was stable to less than 1.5 degrees, about a degree plus minus variation. And now we have the Anthropocene with all these resource extraction that is causing our climate to dramatically change. The consequences, in the late ice age, I think mammoths were winners because they were big and strong and powerful. But as the climate changed, they have lost their place on Earth. The big apes survived, and one of the hominids who came up, Homo sapiens, benefited tremendously from this transformation. But in the process of benefiting tremendously from this transformation, settled agriculture was the turning point 12,000 years ago. They now extract resources that have caused the picture on the bottom right. Is this the way forward? These are the challenges that Gen Z faces. Apart from this, there is also this concept of tipping points, where once we go beyond the tipping point, the Earth will not come back to where it is. And we think the 2 degrees centigrade, scientists agree on it, politicians don't. So how do we convince politicians that 2 degrees centigrade is the tipping point? Certainly when presidents of powerful countries don't believe in it, it doesn't help. So I think it is important that we train young minds to vote for people who will respect these warnings. Why is biodiversity loss important? Many corporates now have understood climate change, but they do not understand biodiversity. This cartoon, I think, tells you what the tipping point for biodiversity is as we begin to lose species at a rate that is unimaginable. It's roughly about 1,000 times the speed of how we lost species before the Industrial Revolution. Fortunately, we had COVID. And why do I say fortunately? Because this lady, Felicia Keesing, around 2010 to 2012, showed with scientific evidence that the loss of biodiversity, and particularly the loss of large animals, will create pandemics. Her paper citations were few. Come 2019, her paper citations have risen exponentially. I'm really happy that I was on a panel of selectors who was able to award her a 40 million yen prize, which is awarded to one scientist out of about maybe 200 nominations for their contributions to the coexistence of man in nature. Felicia Keesing is a wonderful scientist. I'm trying to bring her to Japan towards the end of this year once again to talk to our young students. I hope, since we are partner universities, that your young scholars can also attend this, because she is a wonderful scientist, but she is from a liberal arts college. This also, I think, is important for us to note. However, these things are now made possible because of the Internet of Things. Your scholars and our scholars can be inspired together. But let us look a little more closely at the Internet of Things. This chart tells us that there are about 50 billion intelligent things that are talking to each other. Actually, the figure is about 35 billion. So this is slightly exaggerated. What are these intelligent things? They are becoming increasingly intelligent. Right now, they are about the intelligence of a mouse's brain. But they are likely to become what we think is going to be a human brain very soon. Ray Kurzweil thinks it will be 2035. But in this human-machine existence, there are disturbing trends. Boston Dynamics has developed a robot for the German police. Should robots be weaponized? Autonomous drones are already weaponized. Is this where we want to go? I am reminded of Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro of Osaka University, who keeps his humanoid robot in the classroom when he goes abroad, and the humanoid robot conducts his classes and he remotely controls it from overseas. He is now working on healthcare using humanoid robots. But I think the value for a liberal arts education is what Kazuo Ishiguro, the Nobel laureate in literature recently, tells us in his book Clara and the Sun. Clara is the robot on the left side of this picture. Josie is the sick child who is in the middle of the picture. It's the friendship that develops between Josie and Clara that is the centerpiece of the story. Neither are perfect. Josie is a sick child and Clara is a robot with imperfections, but with a great deal of empathy. The pathos of this story is that it is a celebration of imperfection. If you have a chance, please read it. It's a fascinating novel which hits the heart of what future society should be and could be. Now, against this background, I will very briefly run through what we've done. Many of them will be pictures. You can ask me questions about it later, so I will speed through it. We have a diverse faculty. Nearly 60% are from overseas. All our courses are in English. Our faculty-student ratio is 1:15, and I think our faculty-to-staff ratio is 1:7.2. The average class size is 17. So what is the ethos that we have on campus? It's learning to learn by yourself, autonomous learning. Now, what is the pedagogic structure? It's a residential campus, language and communication, where we learn in English, not learn English, but we learn in English is the key. The self-reflection of liberal arts, empathizing with others is important. But what do we do with the specializations? Now, most, I think, of the US liberal arts colleges have conventional specializations above the liberal arts. I guess it was the same in the past. It was divinity, law, and medicine. That was above the ars liberalis. Now here, we want to do something different because we see, and that is why I asked you to look at the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. That university is a university that focuses on fundamental science without disciplinary boundaries. So I think even for our liberal arts ethos of specialization, to give our students the skills to do things, it should be transdisciplinary specializations. And that, I think, is going to be important for shaping the future. And I think the challenge that you have and we have in Japan and Korea is to go beyond the disciplinary silo and to convince more powerful faculties around us that this is important. I was able to do it in Ritsumeikan because while being president of the Asia Pacific University, I was also vice chancellor of Ritsumeikan. I couldn't have done it otherwise. At AIU, I don't have that problem of other faculties. We took our faculties away and we made them into programs, 3 programs. So, but I think one of the things that I would like to emphasize in education is we must be strict, and strictness with kindness, I think, is what we need to approach our young scholars with. I think discipline is important, but we must also have a place for being irreverent. Many governments are uncomfortable with irreverence. But as a scientist, whether you're a social scientist or a natural science person, you know that irreverence is the birth of inspiration. So for me, irreverence has always been important. And the challenging questions that my research has benefited from has come from the irreverent, absurd question. How do we enable everyone to listen to these questions and work out what to do with them? Co-creation across societies, cultures and localities. Akita has a wonderfully diverse culture. Please come and visit us. I think we have to create new wealth and new value beyond borders. And the value does not have to be only economic value. It can be environmental value, it can be societal value, it can be interpersonal friendships, it can be a lot of things. It can be relational value. So I think in this borderless world, collaborating with local communities is important. We have a 1-year study abroad where this immersion in the local community is suddenly taken into a very different place for them to learn from. We have over 200 partner universities abroad, and you are one of us, one of our partners, our valued partners. But also we have students from every prefecture in Japan. Even Tokyo University, I don't think has 100% of its student intake from every prefecture. So you can see that it is a bit of an unusual university. And I often tell parents who worry whether they should send their children to this distant place in the northeast of Japan, I tell them it might be far from your home, but it's close to the world. So these are the partner universities, and if you look very closely, your eyes are probably better than mine. You'll find Seoul National University on this list as well. And the reason I'm plugging this applied international liberal arts is what this young lady epitomizes. She's one of our scholars who couldn't go overseas on our formal programs because of COVID. But what did she do? She went to Poland and worked in a refugee camp which was taking in Ukrainian refugees. What did she find there? She found among her co-workers in the refugee camp receiving these Ukrainian refugees were Russian citizens who had fled Russia through Finland and come to Poland to help Ukrainian refugees. That is the humanity that we should be appreciating. But that is not the humanity that media portrays. And that, I think, is part of the reason why we have these things going on for much longer than they need to. Every day we see horror stories from one point of view or another. Whether it is Putin's point of view or NATO's point of view, they are always antagonistic. But what this young lady found was that there were Russian citizens helping Ukrainian refugees side by side with her. If she wasn't there, we would have never known this. So the importance of being there, the importance of applying your liberal arts education in real life challenges is important, and she symbolizes this. And this was the event that our university students organized for Ukrainian refugees recently in Akita. So finally, the transition that we are going to make, you'll have to give me 5 more minutes for this. Our 3 concentrations, our transdisciplinary science falls into 3 categories: global studies, global business, and global connectivity. But in the early stages of applying the international liberal arts, we focused on the language and communications and the liberal arts, but we didn't think too seriously about the 3 specializations. What I'm trying to do now is to persuade my colleagues in the university to direct the graduation thesis to maybe 3 areas for each concentration, and these would be the 9 areas that could emerge given our current faculty's capabilities. So 9 options for students to choose from, and they can choose more than one, like a major and a minor. So it's not a disciplinary specialization, it's a transdisciplinary specialization. And the second thing is, if they're going to apply it, they need places to apply it. We have taken 8 project domains which we feel are important for raising and creating new raising the bar and creating new value in Akita, which is faced with all kinds of challenges. And these are the 8 project areas. We are planning to use the advantages gained by the investment in renewable energy to see how we can develop answers to the next 6 areas which will actually use this renewable energy. And as we implement these projects, we will get the data that we want to use to generate new industry and new value. So it's not big data in the conventional sense. It's data that is specific to the solutions that come for these challenges. So it's very different from this mass data, which I think is inefficient because there's a lot of underutilized data that also gets mined. So we'll see how this goes. I'm going to give you one example to show you that these projects are also not isolated silos, but like it has been shown on that diagram on the top right, they also overlap with each other. I'm going to take the Healthy Aging project, and this is the overall picture. I'll skip this, have a look at it more closely later on. But just note that the cyber research teams have been the lessons we learned from COVID. We don't only have to use the platforms for education or communication like we are doing today, we can also use it for research. So this is one of the experiments that we are going to start, and we have started signing agreements with some of our partner universities. I hope we can also do similar engagements with you. Healthy longevity is a key challenge. In some municipalities, nearly 60% of the population is beyond the age of 65. Fortunately, many of them with their traditional diets are healthy. But there is a growing incidence of cancer, dementia, stroke, and heart disease, accompanied by diabetes. So these are expensive diseases to treat. How do we keep the numbers down? This is the structure. You can look at it more closely as you ask questions on it. Our strength lies in the field science and also in the development of some diagnostic devices. But assistive robotics, we will get the help of industry. For the database analytics too, we will have our own team, but again, we will work with industry. It's the same with wearable diagnostics. So these are the companies that are likely to partner with us. And a big giant multinational has joined these companies, Mitsubishi Corporation, who is also part of the energy investments in Akita. So how do we meet the future? How do we add new value? And how can we keep our humanity at the center of it all? These are some of the experimental work that's happening, synergies between the body, the mind, and the brain, particularly to see how sensory stimuli and emotional stimuli are responded to by the brain. Of course, in the scientific sense, those wearables will help us model, measure, and analyze. Mobility can be redefined. If you look at personal mobility, the inability to walk often makes our social circles smaller as we get older and frailer. And this assistive robotics company, Cyberdyne, please look them up. They're a really interesting company, will help in all these areas. It's the same slide. Cybernetics is what this company president, a wonderful scholar, Yoshiyuki Sankai, has articulated as being important. It's at the confluence of human space, the traditional informatics space, and robotic space. He calls this space cybernetics. And I think this is what the future is going to be like. So we are working with them. We don't select many industrial partners. We pinpoint whom we want to work with because we only want to solve the problem. We don't want to just have names on our list. So the first stage of a grant application that we are making is to look at healthy aging from the perspective of our food culture, which is very diverse in Akita, and by redefining mobility to enable better social interactions and engagement and thereby affect the well-being. And we hope that those 8 projects will give us the seeds of innovation that will enable us in the future to create the Akita Future Living, Learning and Enterprise Zone. We call it Afule, and Afule in Japanese means spilling over with new value and goodness. So the first phase will focus on these areas of food culture and mobility and the state of well-being with social engagement. But we will go on in stage 2 to look at shelter, clothing and leisure as well. So it's a 10-year project by which we hope the seeds of innovation will come up, and in our next long-term plan we will be able to establish this zone together with our industrial partners who gather around the projects. So we are asking the companies to take a risk in making this journey with us, and if they take this risk, they will eventually be awarded as the seeds come up and create this zone by having preferential shares in the new zone. But we are looking at the food culture in relationship to the microbiome of our oral microbiome, the microbiological organisms in our mouth, easy to test, and also in our gut, because those two control, I think, our health. And if the relationship between food and the human microbiome can be established, then we will have some hints as to how to make aging a more pleasurable time of one's life. The second area is, I think, what we call physiological health. where the ability to walk, the ability to talk, the ability to eat, the ability to swallow, the ability to interact with others. And maybe robotics can help some of these, can't help everything, but can help some of it. And maybe personalized training would be needed for other areas. The third area is psychological resilience, where we are looking at what we call the relationship of these microbiomes with the immune system. And also we will look at how maybe the, I call it pathological resilience. You know, our immune system in relationship to these microbiome will tell us what our pathological resilience is. We will have physiological health and psychological health. And I think you might have it in Korea too. In Japan, there is this term called ikigai, which means the purpose of living. And when you have a purpose in living, you are less likely to fall into ill health. And this is what our one of our very, very bright young clinical psychology teachers has outlined as how she would like to gather the evidence through field science. So students are going to be part of this. And their lives will change when they see the lives of others being changed. So that is the applied international liberal arts ethos. For mobility, we are working with a company that is developing electrical vehicles that will redefine mobility. The robots can also do it partly, but we are also doing autonomous vehicles that might take movies and convenience stores and mobile pop-up shops to these distant communities which have a hard time going to the shops in the winter. So you can see that you can dream, you can dare to dream, and you can make the dreams come true. But you need to partner with others. We are too small a university to do it only by ourselves. So the food culture in Akita is rich. These are the cultural heritage of Akita. And we've already identified some local partners with whom we are planning to work in disseminating this healthy aging protocols. Same with the food, making Akita's agriculture. Akita is a really rich agricultural region, resilient to climate change. I'm training students in using these instruments, and there are 3 clubs: the programming club, the environment club, and a kind of a community collaboration club. And they probably have about 150 students within these 3 clubs, and they are going to be taught how to use these advanced instruments. And it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with. I don't know what they will come up with, but I'm sure they will do something interesting. This is the way the Max Planck Institute works. It takes very bright people, puts them in a certain place with very little boundaries across disciplines, and gives them a problem. And the Max Planck Institute has more Nobel laureates than Japan. So I think the model works, and that's the model that's been pursued in the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. So please have a look at this. I think traditional universities can learn a lot from this. So these are the drivers. If we want to create inclusive societies, I think a lot of the things inside the grey oval is very, very difficult to do in a short time. It needs application over the long term. Maybe the compassionate humanitarian acts can be done quickly, but the legal frameworks take time. We may be able to raise civic literacy and thereby incorporate some kind of cultural resilience, but it has to be done, I think, through maybe a liberal arts education and understanding through education. So these take time. So these projects that I showed you are actually projects that will breed what I call inclusive innovation. This is what I spoke at the G7 Science and Technology Ministers meeting some years ago. I was told to speak for 20 minutes so that they could question me for 20 minutes, and they grilled me for 2 hours. So I was really tired at the end of it all. But it obviously struck a chord in them, because that is a way we can engage with developing and emerging economies. And exclusion is easy, inclusion is difficult. But I think with the inclusive innovation approach, we can do it faster. I think the key is that there will always be a technology driver, which is an advanced economy, but it's only when it is applied in a technology test bed that it really becomes alive. And as you apply it, you will find new discoveries. And gradually the green circle and the red circle will begin to converge. So it's continuing to circulate knowledge until this convergence comes, that we can enable a kind of egalitarian, a scientifically and a knowledge-based egalitarian society to come around. So we have talent mobilization plans. These are our talent mobilization plans. And these are the opportunities that are coming our way right now. And this is our library, and I hope you can visit us. It's a lovely building. Thank you.
Okay, so we have 3 discussants today. I think I will just briefly introduce to all of you. First, seated next to President Kasim is Professor Choi Yoon-young from the Department of German Languages and Literature. She is currently the Dean of Faculty of Liberal Education. Next, Vice Deans of Faculty of Liberal Education, Professor Lee Dong-hwan from the Department of Chemistry, and Professor Kwon Dae-hoon from College of Fine Arts. Thank you. So we'll start with Professor Choi. 최윤영 선생님 먼저 시작하셔서 차례대로 하겠습니다. So Professor Choi, you can comment and ask questions, and President Kasim will respond, and then move to 이동환 교수님, and then 권 교수님. Okay?
And I've learned really a lot lessons. Maybe I have to return to the beginning point. At the beginning of the lecture, you mentioned about the evolving of Asian universities into worldwide universities. And SNU is a research-focused university, and we have mainly tried to get the academic reputations through the excellence of research. And in some fields of natural sciences, engineering, and the humanities, we have gained worldwide fame. We are especially strong in Korean studies, Asian studies, and modern linguistics in humanities. And many foreign students come to us in these fields. We have twice as many graduate students as undergraduate students. It's my report, and it's my self-critic. And we recently we had more and more attention to education. And for example, the Faculty of Liberal Education, I'm responsible for this faculty, is pursuing educational innovation with the motto of 3 C's for several years. Yeah. And the 3 C's are critical thinking, creativity, and communication and collaboration. And these 3 C's are very similar to your educational reform. We have introduced many new programs: critical thinking and writing, Bridgman seminar, and seminar on convergence topics and independence studies, etc. And we have now platforms, very free platforms, as we can discuss about these social related topics, and so on. And we have also introduced, we also introduced a well-structured program in computer coding in 3 levels for all students. And these programs will be basis for the so-called X plus AI programs, as we think always about the digital natives, the young generation. But we have to think about that, why we want this new pedagogy, and why and for what. That's important questions. And our vice president has mentioned the university is currently preparing for even greater reforms. In other words, it's an effort to introduce a university college that will be a liberal arts college. And therefore, it is very, very important for us to hear your experience today. And I think it's for us a task why we need these transformations, and which role the humanities, or the liberal arts will have. I have two questions. First, I find it great the core concept of your university is liberal arts. I would like to hear about once more about the philosophy and the main components of your liberal arts education program. You are the third lecturer of the university, and 10 years has passed since the university was founded, and you have now new title, Applied International Liberal Arts Program. What remains and what has changed? And the second question, I have heard that your university is very global and international. You have also many partner universities, but I want to know, how can you build such a close relationships as with the faculty at partner universities? My two questions.
Joy, I think you've asked two very important questions, but also not very easy to answer questions because they are so deep and profound. I think what has changed in our 20 years, I will talk of later, but what has remained very strong, language and communication have been a key part, because without that foundation, you really can't express your ideas. And language and communication are meaningless unless you have all those good things you mentioned, like critical thinking capabilities, as well as the ability to empathize and reason and make people understand. Also, there is a great deal of warmth and humanity that comes from courses like our literature courses, or studying how human thought has evolved from Plato and his disciples to Confucius and his disciples over time in Western as well as Oriental thought. So these are all taught in our foundation courses for about 2 years. And they are even provided at a higher level in third and fourth year if students want to take it. So because our classes are small, it enables the students to choose from many, many different mix and matches. To balance this with the number of faculty you have is a juggling act, like having 3 balls in the air, but we've so far been able to do it. Where we want to change is the second part of your question, we think that the conventional liberal arts education and coupled with language skills enables us to understand why human beings exist, what should they be in the future, how have they evolved, what are the likely challenges they face in the future, how can we remain human. And personally, I think the world of the metaverses and the world of the digitized robots and so on and so forth is trying to take us towards perfection. But human beings are imperfect, and that is the joy of being human. So how do we bring this ethos into society so that we can have a much less very concrete result-oriented society to a society that throws up sudden unexpected things and learning how to deal with it. Now, you can think about these things, but if you're in the heart of these things, doing it yourself, then you begin to understand the problems in depth. So the applied international liberal arts is actually to understand the problem in depth by doing things that you have thought of. So it's a coupled reflective action, a reflective thought with very, very purposeful action. And out of this mix, I think something new and profound will come out. Now, as for our 200 partner universities, I'm always amazed by our international office. I couldn't do it. The amount of work and time they do put in to build trust. And we've kept the same administrators for a long time because of this. I think a normal research exchange program is easy to execute. But when you have a student exchange program for 1 year, it's very difficult to execute because you need to build trust. And they have built this trust over the years, over the last 20 years. And that is something I do not want to touch because that takes a long, it's easy to destroy it, but it's so difficult to keep it going. So, and I think in a sense, it's not only our faculty, as I said, we have 1:15 ratio of faculty to students, but our administrators are also involved in this. And if you add all of that, our staff student ratio is maybe 1:7.2 or so, you know. So I think the whole university feels, I think we are different from other universities in that we are not one part of the university doing things. Because we are small, the whole university can do things. And when the whole university does things, the society looks at you differently. And maybe that is why in 20 years we've been able to come up this far. And because of that speed, I think our international partners, although we are small, have given us maybe more recognition than we deserve.
Right. President Kasim, it was a very interesting and very insightful presentation. I'll be talking more about the practical aspect of your transitioning to the next 10 years, that you are really focusing on 3 major themes, and you constructed 9 grids, and you also created like 8 different projects. That sounds pretty complicated thing to do. But at the same time, you still want to maintain this current way of teaching and probably convince all the faculty members to be realigned, whether they like it or not. So is your idea really based on the entire consensus from your faculty, or some of these task force really propose something and then try to convince others? Because not in the same scale, but our university is also transitioning to a different way of structuring our faculty system. There will be a group of students not declaring major at first and getting enrolled. At the same time, there's another group of students who are entering through the traditional track. So there might be some confusion, there might be lot of changes, but at the end of the day, if there's a one way to choose, that is forward, not backward. So we are going to that direction. But as a president, even if this is a small community like yours, but the change is always difficult to implement. So how did you really feel about making big initiative and convincing your colleagues to follow your vision and dream?
If I was to give a 2-word answer to that, it's hurried patience. It's not too slow, but it's reasonably fast. I became president in 2021 June, 1st of June 2021. So it's a year and a half, or a little more than that, Before that, for 7 years, I observed the university as a trustee from 2014 to 2021. And in the years I was a trustee, I was in charge of research and education, so I tried to make suggestions. And I think the applied international liberal arts was one of the consequences. But because it was a teaching-oriented university, the pedagogy was directed at how we deliver our courses. I feel that alone is insufficient for the future. And in order to apply international liberal arts in the real world, we will need a slightly longer lead time, at least for some of our students. And so we will need a new graduate school. We have a professional graduate school which focuses on language and communication practices to build to nurture diplomats and international relations experts and journalists. But I think we need the whole applied international liberal arts ethos to also go with the transdisciplinary work towards a new graduate school. So one of the incentives for the faculty is that right now, there are really good faculty. My predecessors, particularly my last predecessor, has hired well. They're interesting, inspired teachers. But they all do their research work individually with partners outside the university. I want them to also find friends and partners within the university. But to do this, you need a higher sense of purpose that brings everyone together. And the higher sense of purpose, because many of the students have engagements with the local community, is to see how you can build new value to the community. So that's one of the higher senses of purpose. And of course, there is resistance to some of these things. Fortunately, we are in a poor prefecture. We are not in a rich prefecture. And the model in Japan in the past has been to invest resources into the 3 metropolitan regions, create the wealth there, very much like Korea, and then disperse that wealth to the non-metropolitan regions. Now that model is beginning to break down, partly because of rapid aging and lack of a workforce and things like that. So what we are trying to say is we will bypass the 3 metropolitan regions. We engage directly with the world. We will bring new value to this region by engaging with the world. That's the second sense of purpose. So many people subscribe to this. But as you say, faculty members who engage in research can be very, very protective of their research domains. And they may not want to go beyond their particular silo. It's not going to be easy. But because the prefecture has its tax base declining year by year, I've been saying that we have an existentialist threat. And COVID brought that to us. We lost something like $3 million a year on dormitory fees. We lost another $1 million because of Ukraine's fuel crisis. So when you start losing money, there are jobs at stake. So that is my next persuasive move. I've been holding it back, but on the 3rd of April, I'm going to explain the university's finances frankly and say that unless we come together, we have 2 choices. We can chop heads and say we are going to restructure like the way corporates do. But they are such a nice group of guys and girls that I do not want them to lose the friendship and the collegiality they have built. So I've said, as long as I'm here, I will keep the jobs. But you have to give me some of your time. And the time I want you to give me is to invest it with students in those 8 projects. The result is we will have 17 options, as you pointed out, 17 options for students to choose from. That's transdisciplinary. And it's applied. And it will bring new value because already industry is beginning to show interest. So we need then a strong graduate school. That's the next point. And many professors welcome the transition from teaching to research. So it's going to be difficult. And what I did was I didn't force it on them immediately. I just watched and waited, and I spoke. I think I've spoken individually to 2/3 of our faculty, both full-time and part-time. I have another 1/3 to go. But everyone I met talks about the importance of research. So that's a small card I have. But also I have the Times Higher Education rankings. You know the red parts that I showed you, lack of resources. So if we want to increase resources for the university, we have to have an alternative stream of income, which is not our tuition fees. And the only way to do that is to partner with industry and create a kind of a system by which some part of this new zone, some part of the business turnover of the new zone becomes our revenues, our regular revenues. So I've talked to the prefectural governor and the vice governor and said, I need you to help me in this transition, not by giving me more money, but putting money into places where we can leverage national government funds. Because the nation is beginning to change from investing in the 3 metropolitan regions to investing in localities. And the reason this has come about is, I mentioned Mitsubishi Corporation. They generate 20 trillion yen of profits from their overseas operations. They are planning to invest 10 trillion yen in their overseas areas and 10 trillion yen in Japan. But they say they will not invest in the metropolitan regions. They want to invest in the non-metropolitan areas. So when I showed them these 8 projects, they said, this is what we want to do too. We want to make the green transformation and the digital transformation. And their coming in has actually changed everything. I don't know, the faculty, I don't tell them all of these things that are confidential to the corporates. There are many more things. But I see it as hopeful, but I can't share it completely with the faculty. So as you said, I have to do the difficult task of persuading them without giving them the details of a confidential exchange. It's going to be difficult, but what I've decided to do is to tell them we have no choice. We either lose jobs or you give us your time. And if you give us your time, I'm going to give you first choice and second choice and third choice. Please choose the project you want to be part of. We will divide the numbers equally. You can participate in more than one project if you like. But if you have 9 PIs addressing one area, and they are transdisciplinary, there are philosophers, there are psychologists, there are historians, there are people who are good in literature, there are poets, there are violinists, there are all kinds of people. So if you have an interesting bunch of people and you give them a challenging problem, I'm sure something interesting will come out of it. So this, for me, is going to be my nightmare for the next several months. But it will also, I think, if it begins to work, it will perhaps be the most rewarding thing I've done in my life.
I believe it might be kind of a perfect future, perfect alternatives for the future. Okay, let me have one simple question. It would be a very light question. Is there any changes in other universities which are not liberal art college in Japan under the influence of your school?
I think the university became influential firstly among employers who, in the first 10 years, employers found that this university has broken the myth that Japanese people cannot speak English. So that was the first breakthrough with employers. The second breakthrough came in the second president's time, where I think even corporates began to understand that a liberal arts education enables people to go across boundaries. And corporates were hitting boundaries anyway. So I think this, like the Federation of Employers, liberal arts education and STEAM education is what they want to invest in the future. So we were riding the crest of this. And in terms of other universities, the question that you asked, the change came around 2014, where we were taken as the model for the what they call the SGU program. That's a super global university program. So we were made the model, and many traditional universities started opening up liberal arts departments, colleges, a bit like what you're doing. So, but the thing is that now they've caught up with us. So in 2020 we were number 10, and in 2019 we were number 10 because we were at the front line of the 2014 reforms. But by 2020 we had slipped to 14th, 21 we slipped to 17th, 20 I think we were 10th, 21 we were 14th. 20 we were 14th, 21 we were 17th, and now in 22 we have come up to 15th. So I don't mind even if you are 15th or 25th, but as I said, those red lines, they are important, and we can't remain being at the front line doing the same things we did in 2014. We need to be the next role model, and this applied international liberal arts and those 8 projects and 9 areas are what I think will take us to be the next model. So what I tell traditional universities is we can't do all of this ourselves because we don't have strong faculties and departments like you, and you don't have to change that either. You don't have to become like us. But what we can do is we can work together, and for me, a recent agreement we signed with Tohoku University, which Times ranks as Japan's #1 university now. The recent agreement with Tohoku University is an example of that. Now let me give you a small example of how we can work with Tohoku University. Tohoku University has a frontline synchrotron radiation type center that visualizes submolecular materials and cells and things like that. Now, what they have said is we can do the fundamental research, but our scholars in this facility cannot make business propositions out of it. They cannot create the standards and the guidelines that are needed for ethical conduct and so on and so forth. So I've said we will do that part of it for you. Let us see over the years whether we can maybe even create a joint degree, or we can do co-tutoring, we can do all kinds of things. So it's not only these 8 projects. Tohoku University is frontline, world-class facility, also becomes a place where our students can learn from. Cyberdyne's robotics is a place they can learn from. Murakumo's fastest database in the world is where they can learn from. So I think we recognize that we are small and we can't do things by ourselves. And I think by having that 200 exchange program, which the question was asked before too by you, Choi Sensei, by keeping those partnerships going, we've learned how to work with partners and build trust. It's nothing tangible. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's the hard work by everyone, and it's one of our secret strengths, I think. So that is going to help us even in building this research capacity, I think.
Being small and flexible really give you advantage.
Oh yes, you're right. It's fast. The decision making is fast. There are just 3 of us who need to decide what needs to be done. And the 4th person is the administrative head, who then channels it to the administration, and the provost, who is one of the 3, channels it to the faculty. And every now and again, it's a small university, you meet faculty on the campus, you stand and talk about it, tell them what you are thinking or doing, ask their views, and so on and so forth, and keep the friendships going, and hopefully something will change.